Okay, this is our last session. Our moderator had to leave. I think it's a bit cold. So we have three eminent speakers here. Dr. Chandra, you will know. Dr. Muhammad Abu Bakar, and Dr. Abdullah from RIUM. He just joined us, eh?
Yeah,
He just joined us. But he has done extensive work on Malaysian politics. So we have to grab hold of it. Since time is not with us, can I offer something with it? To give this piece on what future holds for Malaysia given the new government.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Moderator, fellow panelists, friends. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shams Yatra, peace. I'd like to begin by thanking the organizer for this very kind invitation. The topic asks us to look at the future. For a political scientist, looking at the future and predicting the future is a dangerous exercise, especially after what has happened. And we would want to refrain from doing that, trying to predict the future, what direction the country is going to take. Nonetheless, one can look at certain present trends and talk about challenges, which is what I'll do this afternoon. Before I talk about the challenges that confront us, I would like to take note of what I think is a very important phenomenon in our political culture, which we should try to strengthen in the future. It is so important that it is perhaps the one thing that makes the change that took place on the 9th of May historically significant. And what is the significance that I'm referring to? This is one of the very rare occasions in world politics, mind you, world politics, where major political change has taken place without violence. Without violence at all. For countries in the global south, it is amazing. And even if you look at the global north, what has been accomplished, a deeply entrenched political party in power for 61 years, a political party that had total control over the media, over all the instruments of state. It had control over the entire electoral process in a sense. And yet, that political party was defeated at the polls, through the ballot box, without a drop of blood. No violence at all. Even if you compared Malaysia to its neighbor, Philippines, where change had taken place a few decades ago. But if you look at Malaysia, it's really remarkable. Total absence of violence as far as a change of this order, of this magnitude is concerned. That, I think, is to the credit of the Malaysian people. It's not this party or the other party, it is to the credit of the Malaysian people. An amazing change that has taken place. And I hope that this can become an example to others, as it will be an example to us. So that in the future, if there has to be change, and not just changes in terms of which party is in power and which party is not in power, but other types of changes. In future, if there are conflicts and disputes, we will be able to resolve them without recourse to violence. peaceful, orderly transition, peaceful, orderly change, which is very rare. And that, I think, is a great achievement. I would regard that as something that we should try to strengthen for the future. It should be part of the direction of the nation. Having said that, let me look at some challenges which I think will set the direction for the future. I shall refer to 5 challenges. Of course, there are many, many other challenges, but 5 challenges which I think are very important for the future, the direction that this country will take. Number 1, challenge related to integrity. Integrity has emerged as a fundamental challenge. It was undoubtedly that one challenge, apart from certain other challenges, but one challenge that determined the outcome of the last election, the question of integrity. Honesty, sincerity, leaders who one can trust, trustworthiness, the whole question of one's rapport with people, the question of how you use power, misuse power, abuse power, I think that was central to the last election. It is something which will determine the future. It will determine the future of the present government. The present government has made it very clear that it wants to uphold integrity. It's not just an election promise, it is what it has been trying to do in the last few weeks. It's all been about integrity. The whole question about 1MDB, about various individuals have been moved out of power, wanting to change certain important public officials. It's all been about integrity. So integrity, I think, is going to be very critical in determining the direction of this nation. Certain things have been done which are good. Certain things have been promised. The government is moving, the Pakatan Harapan government, but I hope more will be done. I hope, for instance, the Pakatan Harapan government will take political financing seriously. There are laws which have been drafted. I hope they will be implemented, they will be strengthened. That's very important. I hope there will also be laws that will control the behavior of people who exercise power, executive power in particular, meaning by which you don't give contracts and projects and licenses to relatives. That should be made into a proper law. There should be laws about open tenders, should be strengthened further. We would like to see perhaps other changes that are very, very important. Agents, proxies that have added up to corruption, some of it we've already seen in relation to the Ministry of Health. But this is much more pervasive than the Ministry of Health, we all know that. I hope that that is a culture that we'll try to eliminate, because that will certainly curb and control corruption. We'd also like to see a situation where the institutions that have been entrusted to fight corruption, like the MECC or SPRM, would be truly independent. That they would be directly answerable to Parliament, not to the executive. And we'd like to see that as far as other office holders are concerned. Your Attorney General, Auditor General, Chief of Police, perhaps even the top positions in the judiciary, that there would be some attempt to change the existing rules and strengthen accountability and transparency. Number 2, another major challenge, which I think is very important for the future, is in relation to democracy. It is good that we're talking about wanting to abolish certain laws. These are things that some of us have been advocating for a long while. The Sedition Act is an archaic law, which doesn't mean that one endorses freedom of expression to the extent that you destroy certain institutions in the country. This is not what it means. I think when one can protect the constitutional monarchy, one can protect special position, one can protect various other institutions and processes of that sort without a law like the Sedition Act. Because if you look at the Sedition Act, actually the Sedition Act makes it unlawful to dissent. So this is something that we should understand. You can't have a democracy without dissent. Now, these are laws that have to go. The securities law, especially the changes that were introduced in the last 2 or 3 years, and other laws which may have to be amended, modified here and there. I think those things will have to be changed. That will be good, including the Publication Act, perhaps, even University and University Colleges Act, further changes. These are things that are welcome. That's one aspect of strengthening democracy. But for me, the more important dimension of strengthening democracy is this. We have to strengthen the participatory dimension of democracy. Making democracy something that means everything to ordinary people. Grassroots participation, grassroots democracy. That I think is what in the long run will sustain democracy. Meaning by which I think we'd like to see a situation where people participate in decision making, in the process of formulating public policies, more than just voting once in 4 years or 5 years. Now that sort of participation. Perhaps we should bring back local government elections, but with significant changes to the structure of local governments themselves. I think that has to change, but some way of enhancing the participation of ordinary people in the democratic process. I think that is critical for population. But underlying that is a culture that we have to change. We cannot have democracy, meaningful democracy, if it is embedded in a culture which is neo-feudal. This has been one of our very big problems in our society. That you may have democratic structures, an elected parliament, and a certain degree of separation of powers. Those are structures, those are processes. But what about your larger political? Our political culture, to some extent, has remained neo-feudal. Don't question people at the top. Unquestioning loyalty, which is one of the reasons why we got into the 1MDB crisis. Because you don't ask questions. It is not the right thing to do. Civil servants, politicians, cabinet colleagues, you don't ask questions. But this is a culture that has to be overcome. We have to overcome this culture. You must be willing to ask questions, to challenge. There is nothing indecent about challenging people who exercise authority. You can do it by retaining our culture. In other words, you can do it in a polite manner. You can do it in a courteous manner. But question, one must. You must raise questions. You must challenge authority which is necessary. It is in fact a very Islamic virtue to raise questions about authority. From the very beginning of Islam, this has been seen as a precious thing. Asking questions, challenging authority, pointing out what is wrong. Now that's the second challenge that I wanted to share with you. The third challenge. And this is something that we all recognize, we talk about, but not enough attention is given. The whole question of economic and social justice. The gap between the have-a-lot and the have-a-little. The GE14, their situation in our society today, which is linked to many other challenges that we are not even aware of. But the situation of people right at the bottom, those who are struggling to make ends meet. What we need are not palliatives, band-aid solutions, including BRIM, and the new government has renamed it, but that is not the solution. Renaming BRIM is not the solution. You have to look at the underlying causes. And the underlying causes, if I may suggest, friends, one could perhaps look at it from 3 perspectives, very quickly, very briefly. Number one, see it in terms of the actual victims of injustice, the victims of poverty. That will be one dimension. The wage structure, the emoluments structure, remuneration is very important. You can raise the minimum wage, link it with productivity, that is important, but we must also look at the remuneration of people right at the top. That is something that very few capitalist economies are prepared to do. But that is the root of the problem of widening disparities all over the world. It's not Malaysia alone. In many other countries it's even worse. That you have 1% of the population controlling 60% of the nation's wealth. That's because no one talks about the remuneration system right at the apex. That will have to change too. I'm glad that in one of the early cabinet meetings, the present Prime Minister, who is of course the Prime Minister from the past, but the present Prime Minister had raised this question about the reward system at the top. And I think this is something we have to look at in our country. Big private sector corporations, the GLCs, the whole works, and people at the bottom. How can we really close the gap? It's very important. The second dimension of fighting poverty is to look at the ecosystem of the poor. One is the wage structure or the structure of reward. The second is the ecosystem. For the poor, from tariqas to the schools they attend, to the healthcare facilities they have, public transport system, housing, this is part of that ecosystem. We have given some attention, but I think we have to give much more attention to the environment. How we can make that our focus in the coming years, because that's going to determine the future to a great extent. And the third dimension is the entire culture. How do you bring about social justice within a larger culture that is overly materialistic, within a larger culture which is obsessed with consumption, consumerism, which has really hit the roof in this country. If you look at the way consumerism is in Malaysia, this I think is a very big challenge. The religion, and it's important that we talk about this at a university level, UIA, the religion that transcends all religions is the religion of consumerism. Consumerism is a very, very powerful religion. And look at its impact upon societies everywhere. How do you deal with that in order to change the situation of the have-nots, those who are weaker and vulnerable in society? So that is very important. I say this partly because of what has happened in recent days. If you look at the raids that have been conducted and what the raids, some homes belonging to certain individuals, how much they reveal in terms of your jewelry and your watches and your bags and of course the cash. If it is true, there's no reason to doubt its authenticity, I think it is something that we should be ashamed about. What this means is that in future, Malaysia will be known for this. For many, many decades to come, people are going to talk about this. That you had a situation where you had people who were in power, who were able to get away with this. Lavish, extravagant, exorbitant lifestyle. And that is a problem all over the world. It is not just in this country, but it's a problem that one has to resolve if you want to bring about greater justice in society. A fourth challenge, which will also set the tone for the future. It is related to ethnic relations, one of our major challenges. We can't run away from this. And we have had ethnic issues with us for a very long while. We can't deny this. Nearly every issue, nearly every institution, every individual, somehow the ethnic perspective emerges. The way in which we see things, the way in which we try to overcome issues, the ethnic dimension is always there. The ethnic come religious dimension. is so very important in our society. This overemphasis upon ethnicity and religion in a negative way, I do not see these as issues that should disappear from our society. They can't, and they won't. They'll be there. What I'm saying is, we don't want a negative expression of issues pertaining to ethnicity and religion. That is what is destructive. It can destroy any society, even a democracy. Even a democracy can be destroyed because of this obsession with ethnicity and religion in a negative manner. And in order to avoid that, we'll have to do certain things. But before that, let me say that with the 14th general election, on the one hand, you may say superficially that maybe ethnicity and religion will not take the same form anymore, that things may get better. Superficially, yes. If you look at the four parties, with the exception of one party, the others are not overly concerned with ethnicity in that sense, perhaps. One can argue that if you look at membership of these parties, the issues they raised, their campaign, maybe ethnicity was not that important, religion was not that important to these parties perhaps, but nonetheless there are undercurrents that you cannot ignore. The 14th general election was also an election linked to ethnicity and religion. Those who say that the 14th general election overcame issues of ethnicity and religion, it is very naive. It didn't. Why do I say this? If you look at what in the end brought victory to the Pakatan Harapan, the PH, leaving aside the swing in the Malay vote, which both Ibrahim Sufyan and Prof. Said Arabi talked about, it was very important, the factor that brought about a change in government. But before that, from 2008, it was very, very obvious to all of us that a very high percentage of the Chinese voters, they want to change. And in 2013, Chinese Indian voters, they want to change. In other words, they wanted to get rid of the BN. That is very obvious from 2008 onwards. It is not simply because of issues of governance that they wanted to get rid of the BN government. I think ethnicity played a very big role. Why? Why do I say this? Well, a lot of Chinese voters and a significant portion of Indian voters, there is no doubt at all that if you look at their underlying sentiments, their perception of government since 2008, but even before that, but it became very obvious in 2008, was that what they had all along, what they regarded as their burden, was a Malay-led government, UMNO. That UMNO was in some ways their problem, their challenge. That was the underlying sentiment. That they were second-class citizens, they are victims, they are marginalized, they are oppressed, because that was the way in which the narrative had been developed over decades. From the days of Lee Kuan Yew, that was the narrative that had been developed. And that narrative became stronger and stronger. At certain times, some elections, that narrative receded, but at other elections, it came back. 2008, it was very obvious that a lot of the Chinese and a lot of Indians wanted to change because they felt that this was the big burden, the hurdle, the obstacle that they faced. Government led by UMNO. So the ethnic force was there even in this election. So I'm not surprised. If you look at the statistics that were presented, more than 90% of the Chinese. And Indian vote, from the statistics that I've seen, and I think both Said and Ben's studies would also have shown this, that about 70% perhaps of the Indian vote went against the BN, went against UMNO specifically. So that was an ethnic force. It was certainly a force determined by ethnic sentiments. And if one says that religious sentiments didn't play a role, of course they did. Because when Malays moved away from UMNO, and it was obvious in this election, they moved to both Pakatan Harapan, which was not ethnic, yes, and to PAS. But the support for PAS, without any doubt at all, religion played a role. And it is understandable, because we had argued for a long while that when a lot of Malays give up on UMNO, which has been in some ways the symbol of Malay nationalism, a party that gave a lot of comfort to the Malay community, not just like any other ordinary party. When they move away from a party like that, as it happened in the last election, they would move to a party that also gives them psychological and emotional comfort. And of all the parties, it would be PAS. Not Keadilan, not Amana, not Party Group, Pribumi, and so on. So they moved to PAS. And so it didn't surprise me at all. This is why when some analyst earlier on said that PAS would be wiped out in this election, I was amused, because I thought that it was totally off the mark. There was no way PAS was going to be won. And at the end of the day, in a sense, PAS was strengthened. So religion and ethnicity are very powerful forces. And if you look at the outcome of the elections, and if you look at the real situation today, for the first time in our history, we have in power a multi-ethnic coalition in terms of its individuals, but a multi-ethnic coalition where the non-Malay element is stronger than the Malay element in terms of numbers. In terms of numbers. Of course, there are some changes here and there now, but if, let's say it is 115, 116 members that you're talking about on the side of the PH, about 53 are Malays and Muslims. So there is a very significant change. It has not happened like this at all before. This is the first time. That you have in government, in other words, you have a government which is representative, and I must emphasize this, which is representative of the nation, but nonetheless, it is more non-Malay than Malay. And for the first time, you have on the opposition benches, for the first time, mind you, in our history, on the opposition benches, you have preponderantly more Malays than non-Malays. Between UMNO and PAS, again, some changes here and there, we about 72. So it is a different situation. You have, in other words, a government which doesn't represent the demographic ratio. It doesn't represent the demographic ratio. It doesn't represent the electoral realities in that sense, because the majority of constituencies are Malay majority constituencies. But because of the way voting took place, and that is to be expected in our system, first past the post system, it will happen. But because of the way voting took place, you have a situation that you have today, where the majority are non-Malays in government, though the cabinet, we know, is different. It is still preponderantly Malay cabinet, but the realities have changed. And what that shows is, and this brings me to a very critical point, that in dealing with issues of identity as opposed to issues of governance, they are interrelated, but they're different. Issues of identity as opposed to issues of governance, I think the PH has to be very careful. Pakatan Harapan has to be very careful. Because it is less representative of the dynamic force of identity compared to the opposition. The opposition represents identity much more, Malay identity. Which is why I think the Pakatan Harapan has to be very, very careful. Because identity issues will have a major impact in societies like ours. Which is why, if you look at the Minister of Finance issuing a statement in Chinese, look at the reactions to things like that. And a couple of other issues. But the point I'm making is, issues of identity will be important, and they will overwhelm issues related to governance. So this is something they want us to keep in mind. And how does one solve this? How does one at least address this challenge? I think you cannot ignore one at the expense of the other. This is the mistake that one can make. Don't ignore one at the expense of the other. Both are equally important. Pay attention to governance, but also pay attention to issues of identity. And this brings me to the fifth and last challenge. The fifth and last challenge, it is related to foreign policy, which has seldom been discussed since the elections. Though there have been examples of foreign policy issues, Malaysia and Japan, Malaysia and China, issues of that sort. But this, I think, is going to be a very, very important issue in the future, given what is happening all around us. US, China, South China Sea, Straits of Malacca. So you must have very clear, lucid thinking on foreign policy issues. We don't know whether it will happen, but we hope that we will move in the direction of new government, that they will understand what is at stake. There are certain things you cannot change in life as in politics. You cannot change job. China will always be there, and we'll always be here. It's going to be our neighbor. We have to take that into account when we look at the larger realities. You cannot run away from the fact that the South China Seas, Straits of Malacca, they may be arenas of conflict in a situation where a very powerful nation is declining without any doubt at all, and ascendant power is on its resurgence. China. What do you do in a situation like this? So I think clear thinking is very important. That's a big challenge. That will determine our stability, will determine our own future. Let me conclude with this very quick observation. One of the good things that has emerged out of this election is we have seen active citizens very active, very involved, not only in the elections but the post-election period, making a lot of noise and so on. I think that's good. But let us also have a thinking citizenry, not just active citizenry, but a thinking citizenry. You reflect, you think, you analyze, you don't just take positions out of hatred or anger. You reflect on situations and try to come up with positions which make sense. That's very important, because in a society like ours, if we yield to our immediate passions, it can become very dangerous. So let's have a thinking, reflective society. Let's also have a society that is ethical and principled. Because so much of what we've seen in Malaysian politics, unfortunately, shows that we don't really pay that much attention to ethics and principles. And I don't want our nation to go down in history as a nation which every now and then, at every turn, exhibits traits that give the impression that we are totally unprincipled. One day you're the head of government, the next day you're the head of the opposition. It's just amazing. It doesn't happen very often. Today you take a particular position, tomorrow you take a totally different position. So those who want to be balanced, who want to be honest, they find it very difficult in this society. Because people change positions so easily. Because at the end of the day, it's power and wealth that are the main determinants in our society. Let us have a society where the main determinants are actually values and ethics. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Then,
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Professor Rabi Aidid as moderator. Okay, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I suppose that we have been very much governed by so-called imponderables. At least that's how we have been prior to the last election. So much so that we have met with what I would consider unexpected development in the forms of the result of the last election. In the enthronement of Dr. Mahathir and Pakatan Harapan. In the enshrinement of the so-called the new vision of the respective party, and also in the downfall of UMNO or Barisan Nasional, which has been in place for the last 6 decades or so. These are some of the imponderables. So much so that in circumstances that we were in before the last election, none of the political analysts, either within the country or outside the country, have been able to predict the outcome. At the most, their predictions ran as such, i.e. that Barisan Nasional would necessarily win a bit with a smaller majority. Some have gone to the other extent of saying that Barisan Nasional will emerge a greater party, stronger, with 2/3 majority. So what happens as a result of these imponderables? What happened was something virtually inconceivable, and this is what we have been witnessing lately. I want to reverse that a bit. Let us think of the ponderables, because by looking at the ponderables, think that you can think easily, think that we could speculate easily, then probably we could see the parameters within which the nation is going to work out in the future. How the so-called new Malaysia will evolve out of the present circumstances. And that can only be done by looking at the ponderables. Ponderables refer to those things that can be easily speculated upon, based on history, based on tradition, based on the existing situation which have surrounded us. For sure, we can talk a lot about the new Malaysia, but the new Malaysia cannot be cobbled just like that, out of the blue, by concocting based on the existing ingredients arising from the last election. We willy-nilly would produce a new Malaysia. There is no way. What are those things that needs to be taken care of when it comes to looking into the future? A, the present is necessarily an extension of the past. As a student of history, I would say this is crucial when it comes to understanding Malaysia at this particular juncture. I refer especially to the various fundamentals which have governed us all along, at least for the last 60 years. The traditions which is embedded in history, the constitutions, the sultanates, the federalism, even the various time-honored ways that UMNO had been pursuing in the forms of the new economic policy, with all their negative or positive expressions, as Dr. Chandra Muzaffar has alluded to. So those fundamentals are still in place, are still embedded in society, are still part of that living history, and one has to take cognizance of this in order to understand the future of Malaysia. If we do away with all that, we are going to do it at our own peril. I'm saying that. So those time-honored traditions, whether of the negative or positive expressions, are here to stay. What more, UMNO, as the largest single party in parliament, is still around, echoing the same feeling, the same sentiment as it has been doing for the last 60 years. Then there are those who are trying to put a break to this. Who are they? The new voters, the urban dwellers, those who have been galvanized by globalist factors, globalist values emanating from the various international organizations. The NGOs, of course, you do have some of them who are to be considered as fair weather citizens, as bird of passage, who are critical of the present government or the existing government, are wanted to do away with all that in order to look for a better future. And failing that, they cast their vote against the earlier government, against Barisan Nasional, and so on and so forth. Not to mention those others who were disillusioned with UMNO, with Barisan Nasional's rule for the last 60 years, having been relegated into the background as the so-called second-class citizens, as Dr. Chandra Muzaffar has alluded to also. So in other words, if we do not take cognizance of what even Dr. Chandra Muzaffar said, the identity of the people that has been popularized by the earlier government, the larger picture which has governed us, which has defined our way for a long time, if we do not take all that into consideration, then we are going to be hamstrung by all this, even if we have greater goals, better ideas for the future of Malaysia. That has to be taken into account when it comes to understanding the future trends of Malaysia. The larger picture, how is even negating some of our present visions of a better society. And politics has to do with realities, not just with posturing as such. One. Number two, who are these people who are at the helms now? Dr. Mahathir is a former Barisan Nasional leader who was cooked in the cauldron of the old. He still has some of the old baggages, in spite of being a reform man. I'm not saying no, in spite of being a reform man. But Dato' Anwar Ibrahim also was part of the old UMNO. So in a sense, it's UMNO versus ex-UMNO man. Likewise, you have past men in Amanah. Many of them are considered deviants to the present past leaders, but they go against the grain of the past old struggle, of old past conservatism. So at the end of the day, what transpired was a contest between former past leader and present past leaders. So in other words, in a way, it's just a resurrection of the same old political landscape, except that they were vying for power, to usurp each other, and to be in control. As far as the measures are concerned, I go along that there is less of party consideration or even ideological baggage when it came to voting. I've mentioned this elsewhere in my talk about what I describe as without party, without ideology situation. This is the characteristic feature of some of our masses of our electorate recently. In regards to those leaders, Dr. Mahathir, Anwar Ibrahim, and the whole bunch of Parti Harapan people, whom I know pretty well, they were vying for power. They were against the old leaders for various reasons, but I doubt they were able to come up with what I call new ideologies, new political philosophies. None of them have been able to fashion the way by invoking new ideologies, new philosophies as embedded in the party manifesto. They only talk about fine-tuning, they talk about micromanaging the country, and so on and so on and so forth. Whereas the opposition, which constitute the old and the new, which were enamored of the earlier ideas in some places, and who were trying to usurp some of the earlier leaders in order to revamp and rejuvenate the party, they too are still finding comfortably in the past. They are finding comfort in the past, trying to show the way to relieve the past by telling that it's the leaders who are corrupt, not the ideas of UMNO itself. So on the other hand, within the opposition ranks and file, you still have people, UMNO of old, UMNO of the old ideas, UMNO who believe that having had it for 60 years, they could have more. So we can see this probably in the next UMNO election. Who is Tengku Razali? Don't tell me he's going to change 90% in his political views and posture. Who is Zahid Hamidi, for that matter also. At the most, Khairi could be a bit of aberration, simply because he's a member of the new generation. So, based on this configuration of powers within PH and within UMNO, And in terms of their relationship, at best what we could expect of the future is that attempts will be made to clean some of the party of some of the corrupt leaders. There will be attempts to usurp some of them. There will be attempts to pay the national debt. There will be attempts to restructure the GLC, the government links cooperation, etc., etc. And at the end of the day, they will be going for what looks like better government. There's no doubt about that. And this also has been mentioned in passing by Dr. Chandra Muzaffar. We are not going to say no to all that. This is all good for the nation. But coming back to the larger picture, the old paradigms, I'm afraid, I'm inclined to think, even though in hearts of heart, I don't like it, but I'm more inclined to think that they are going to rear their heads once Dr. Mahathir is no longer on the scene, once other leaders taking over Pakatan Harapan, once some of the old leaders of UMNO, having been able to come to power once again, will be equally overwhelmed by the same old considerations of UMNO of the past, etc., etc. Well, when it comes to foreign policy, well and good if we are able to strike a more balanced approach to foreign policy, not to overemphasize on China, but to give way to other countries also in foreign investment in Malaysia, etc., etc. And this is a non-controversial part of it, even though Malaysia's posture lately under Dr. Mahathir has sent jitters around, especially China, and has somehow comforted the others, especially Japan or probably the United States of America, and so on and so forth. So, looking at this scenario, we may have a new narrative. I go along with that, but it's well written in either in English or in Rumi, but it is still the same old script. That is what I begin to feel as I look at it, number one. Number two, because of the lack of vision or ideologies or political philosophy in PH in particular, as opposed to UMNO, as mentioned by Dr. Chandra, they are better off in terms of that, as put it. Yes. Intra-PH squabbling is going to be widespread. It happens before in Selangor. It is still open. It's happening now, right now, and it's coming to the open, as you know, right? Either because of representation in the cabinet, and so on and so on. And that makes me rather pessimistic as to whether their visions will overcome all that. That their squabbling will be overtaken by philosophies of the future, political philosophy, and so on and so forth. Or whether they too will be undermined in the process, especially with the demise, when I say demise, not necessarily death of Dr. Mahathir, because he has been saying all along that if there has been criticism of him, he might not stay longer. He might stay for 2 years or more. But looking at it, like it or not, he's not going to stay probably until the next election. So that will open the way for greater party, intra-party squabbling within PDIC. If that is the case, my fear is that all those visions of a better Malaysia will be thrown into the wind. And all the results of the last election that we have been heaping praise on will be thrown into the dustbin of history. So it's better to be a devil's advocate at this juncture, Dr. Chandra. And I've always been like that, I think you know that. But if it works better, we all should embrace it. Thank you.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum. I'm with very big personalities in politics, and I prepared a text. And some of those things that I will be mentioning, Dr. Chandra has mentioned it, but probably I'll stick to the text. But there is no arguing that it was an intensely contested election. Some people say the mother or father of all battles. issues on 1MDB, corruption and abuse of power, coupled with issues of cost of living, GST, were the meat of the election rallies. But what is surprising is not just the result, which caught many pundits off guard, surprise, but the manner in which power was transferred. Despite Malaysia experiencing 60-odd years of single-party rule by the national, the country saw a smooth and seamless transfer of power. This is a rarity when you talk about political change, and something that Malaysians should be proud of, especially when they compare the transition of power in neighboring countries. The removal of Indonesia's President Suharto, the people's power that deposed President Marcos in the Philippines, and Thailand's incessant power struggle after the ouster of Mr. Thaksin Shinawatra demonstrate how transfer of power can be painful, violent, and damaging. In Malaysia, we saw no blood on the streets, like what you mentioned, as a result of this change of power. What we witnessed in the days of after 9th of May was political maturity. The change of power also demonstrates Malaysia's institutional resilience. 20 years of reformasi, the continued quest for political change, the 1MDB scandal, and the smooth transition of power testify that Malaysia's institutions are rock solid, something that we should be proud of. Malaysia has done well, especially in separating politics from the bureaucracy. Some people say reasonably well. The judiciary, monarchy, and the security apparatus have all stayed above politics. Common sense has prevailed. Indeed, all of the above demonstrate a politically mature electorate. But this is my point in this seminar. As much as Malaysians have learned lessons on democracy and democratization, there is yet another lesson to be learned, perhaps a more demanding one. And this is that democracy comes with responsibility. The democratic change that we saw on the 9th of May demand more than just the venting of anger, prejudices, and preferences. Malaysians must now realize that democracy comes with responsibility. And the next 5 years will test how well Malaysia carries out democratic responsibility. Now, what is democratic responsibility? First, democratic responsibility means those who have triumphed do not have the right to verbally and physically abuse those who are on the losing end. Days after the election, amidst the exuberance of a so-called New Malaysia, comments by even the likes of Rafizi Ramli and Cynthia Gabriel were put down very harshly. In our exuberance, there is no need to resort to what I call, maybe a bit harsh, cyber lynching. We should not, on the pretext of celebrating regime change, unwittingly become perpetrators of hateful acts that deny freedom to others. In this so-called New Malaysia, we need to embrace political openness, failing which we are no better than the people whom we condemned for selection bias. We must welcome differences and must see differences in opinions as strength, ones that can make for better argument or policies. Second, to be democratically responsible, we need to have a measured or calibrated sense of freedom. As much as we like to smell this air of freedom, we must not abuse freedom. In a highly plural or heterogeneous setting such as Malaysia, we must remember that unremitting freedom can also tear us apart. People who espouse hateful speech may be exercising their rights, but at the end of it, they weaken society. We must remember that freedom abused by some could mean freedom threatened for all. Third, to be democratically responsible is to temper our feelings with fact. This is especially needed in this age of post-truth politics. To temper our feelings with facts requires us not just to have a point of view, but to support it with facts and logic, based on objective information. We need to bear in mind that just because others share similar feelings like us does not make the feeling a fact. Fourth, To be democratically responsible is to treat each other with respect. We may disagree on matters of policies or issues, but such passionate disagreement should not end with resorting to caustic contempt. As much as we demand respect from others, we should not refuse others the respect they deserve. Fifth, democratically responsible means to have a viable, respectable civil society. Civil society has been instrumental in bringing about change in Malaysia, and we should continue to harness it. Safeguarding this democracy means the need for something long-term, and I think civil society can provide an enduring discipline to the democratic process. They provide this moral compass or political compass to make sure that we will not lose our bearing, especially in this period where populism and fake news are the rave. 5 years is a long time in politics. Malaysian politics at times can be very amorphous. Hence, we need civil society to be an important part of this democratic fabric. Finally, to be democratically responsible requires Malaysia to enhance the capacity of representative government. We should celebrate representative government or democracy and not allow it to be undermined by acts of oligarchy or authoritarianism. The last election, we all know, was fought on issues of governance, transparency, and accountability. Hence the need to work hard to ensure that representative government work and not allow any form of authoritarianism, despotism, corruption to creep back to Malaysia's democratic process. In the words of George Washington, we should not allow cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government. Indeed, democracy comes with huge responsibility, and I'm hopeful that given Malaysia's success in democratic change, this new Malaysia hopefully will see stronger institutions and even greater development. Thank you.